Okay, we're going to go ahead and adjust my microphone. Then we'll get started. Planning and Zoning Commission meeting of December 12th, 2022. Can we have the roll?
Andre Spinelli.
Here.
Brandy Eber.
Here.
Jared Gardner.
Here.
Jim Winchester.
Here.
Radhika Krishna.
Here.
Jeff Ron.
Here.
Scott Pullis.
Here.
You have a quorum.
Thank you. I don't believe we have any minutes that need approval this session, so we'll just move on to disclosures. Commissioner Pullis.
No disclosures.
Commissioner Winchester.
No disclosures.
Commissioner Krishna.
Yes, I'd like to disclose that in regards to the downtown code update items, I am the executive director of the Anchorage Downtown Partnership, and I've been at two public meetings, including the Downtown Community Council and a Third Avenue Radicals meeting, where update on this project was given by the planning department. I just want to make that known, but don't believe that there's a conflict.
Thank you, Commissioner Krishna. I don't see any conflict from attendance at a public meeting, and unless any other commissioner sees an objection or would like to discuss, then I think we can just move forward. Okay, seeing nothing. Commissioner Spinelli?
Nothing to disclose.
Commissioner Ron?
No disclosures.
Commissioner Eber?
No disclosures.
And no disclosures for myself. With that, we'll just on to our regular agenda and the public hearing item, case 2022-0129. And before we start with that, I will read the procedure by which the public may speak to the commission at its meetings. After the staff presentation is completed on public hearing items, the chair will ask for public testimony on the issue. Persons who wish to testify will follow the time limits established in the commission rules of procedure. Petitioners, including all of his or her representatives, will receive 10 minutes. Part of this time may be reserved for rebuttal. Representatives of groups, community councils, PTAs, etc. will receive 5 minutes. Individuals receive 3 minutes. When your testimony is complete, you may be asked questions by the commission. You may only testify once on any issue unless questioned by the commission. Any party of interest wishing to appeal shall first file with the planning director within 7 days of the commission's decision made on the record a written notice of intent to appeal in accordance with AMC 2103-050A.4.a. Commission recommendations to the Anchorage Assembly are not appealable. Following approval of the written findings of fact and decision, any party of interest may, within 20 days, file an appeal by filing a notice of appeal and paying the appeal fee and deposit in accordance with Section 21.03.050. The notice of appeal must be filed with the planning director on a form prescribed by the municipality. If the appellant is not the applicant, the appellant's notice of appeal shall include proof of service on the applicant. And I guess with that, we'll move to our first case, item G1. Can we hear a report from staff?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. Christine Vanell, Long Range Planning Manager with the Planning Department. And I'm actually here on 3 partner items, so we'll talk first about case 2022-0129, and that is paired with case 2022-0133, which is some technical edits to the 2040 land use plan. And then we'll also talk about case number 2022-0134, which is also some edits to the downtown plan. And each of you have a copy of the plan there at your place where you're sitting.
Sorry, that reminded me, would it be helpful for the planning department, or would you suggest or see any value in hearing officially all 3 cases at the same time if there were a motion from the commission to do so?
Sure, if you want to. It's
I guess open question for the commission.
So moved.
Okay, moved by Commissioner Spinelli.
Second.
Okay, so the motion is to combine all three cases, moved by Commissioner Spinelli, seconded by Commissioner Ron. Commissioner Spinelli, feel free to speak to your motion if you'd like.
Tend to support the motion. Think it'll move things along quicker.
Okay, thank you, Commissioner Spinelli. Seeing no further discussion, we'll just go ahead and call the vote.
Ms. Eber?
Yes.
Thank you.
Okay, 7 votes in favor, that motion passes. We'll hear the three cases at the same time. I think we'll still need a separate motion for each case at the end. And for the benefit of the members of the public that are here, I believe this means as well that you'll have triple the time for speaking that I mentioned earlier. Okay, thank you, Christine. Sorry for the interruption.
Sure. No, thank you. So I'll go ahead and proceed then. Tonight is the public hearing set for the Title 21, Chapter 11 Downtown Zoning Districts Code Update. As we spoke last week, this has been a process that's been ongoing for a couple of years now. It started in 2019 with the reformat of the downtown code and then the completion of the downtown comprehensive plan, and now we've updated the actual downtown code. So I'm here tonight, Christine Bunnell with the Long Range Planning Department, along with Daniel McKenna Foster. He'll be here in a few minutes. And then we have Laquita in the audience. And as you know from last week, she was part of our working group. And so she's here tonight to help support the projects. You have in your packet a staff memo on each of the items. And in relation to the draft ordinance, attachment number 1 is the ordinance, and then we provided a clean version of the proposed draft ordinance, which is attachment number 2. We had a comment response table that was dated December 5th, and that's attachment number 3. And then the actual comments that we received in attachment number 4. And then today around 1 o'clock, we emailed you attachment number 5, which were comments that came in from Cook Inlet Housing Authority and also from you all. And so we wanted to make sure that we got those responded to and back to you. So the biggest change in this plan, in the code, is one of the biggest changes is the deletion of the bonus point table. And that's because in the early 60s, much of the development and vision for downtown was based on this bonus point table, which needed to be interpreted. It was difficult to calculate and understand. Density achievement was highly biased towards providing underground and structured parking. The dimensional codes and the dimensional standards in the code force compact square forms above 3 levels, and those are that square building that we showed you last week. The square form is contrary to modern apartment design and construction and has most likely discouraged residential development in downtown. This code allows shorter, thinner, longer buildings which are more efficient and economical to construct, and because rectangular buildings have increased surface area with access to natural light and views. The code update also includes a few added allowed uses, a revised set of design standards compiled into a straightforward list to choose from. Building heights are allowed by right, so there's no more bargaining for height or square footage. Again, going back to the bonus point table, this bargaining only led to resistance to providing ground floor amenities, and alternative equivalent compliance is allowed for all design aspects for downtown. We recognize up front that the code is a good foundation and designers can always come up with something unique, so this code encourages creativity. A calculated step back depending on street width and proposed building height will allow for solar access, view protection, and mitigation of wind impacts. We believe this amendment meets the direction from AMC 2103-210 to provide a code that promotes public health, safety, and general welfare. This amendment also supports the streamline of the code intended to help Anchorage meet the 1,400 new housing unit target in the next 5 to 8 years, adopted in the downtown plan in April 2022. So the edits to the 2040 plan, one of those talks about reformatting essentially the name of the B2A, B2B, and B2C districts into DT1, DT2, and DT3. And after a lot of discussion within current planning and the long-range planning department, we felt like that wasn't the best thing to do. We felt it would be confusing. And so we're editing that out of the 2040 plan, as well as other language that kind of refers to that. The edits that are in the actual downtown plan are to help clarify a few things, to add some more pictures, some more photographs into the plan, and then to also, in the urban design section, make sure that we don't have any conflicts between the updated downtown code and what was originally stated in the plan. And again, this is consistent with what we were hearing from our working group and then what we were hearing from developers and from the public. So if you want me to, Daniel and I can go over the amendment number 5, if you want to do that first, or we can just go ahead with questions.
When you say amendment number 5, you mean you're referring to,
Oh, I'm sorry, attachment number 5, yeah.
I think that'd be fine if you want to go continue through that.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah, so we had the question about basically the view and solar access over Town Square Park, and then also Petroglyph Park. Town Square Park has been in code for quite a while now, and I just learned tonight that the Muni actually bought the air rights over Town Square Park to preserve the park the way it is today. And so that's why you have that language in code about Town Square Park. We did include a couple of different shadow studies here for you at different times of the year. And I don't know if Tim wants to speak to that or Laquita wants to speak to it. They may have a suggestion about that. So that's your first 3 pages. And then we also, getting back to the comments that we heard about, I'm sorry, I'm getting lost a little bit. Someone made the comment, could the code, the way that it's been updated, what kind of buildings can it really build? So the next few pages in amendment number 5, you see some visualizations there, and it starts with block 56. So it's on like the 4th page. So there's 2 visualizations for block 56, which is at the corner of L Street and 6th Avenue. So this is a mixed-use concept here. This is 1, 2, 3, I think 6 stories. It's got a step back there with a nice patio area for solar access, as well as for views. And Bettisworth North came up with this visualization for us based on the updated code. The next one that we have is on the next page. Again, 6th Avenue and L Street. This is across the street. So this is the parking lot that is directly across Peterson Towers. And that visualization, again, about 6 stories. This would be a mixed-use building. You've got some patio area there to allow solar access. This has parking on the 1st floor. It could also have underground parking. So again, the updated code would support a building like this. The last 2, or the middle 2 pages are 9th Avenue, and these are visualizations for Block 102. And Block 102 is on the corner of 9th Avenue and D Street, and it is currently also a large parking lot. So on Ninth Avenue there, we visualized some kind of like brownstones. Those could be 4 stories. You've got a basement story there, and then you've got 3 stories on top. There's parking that could be behind there. And then behind that building, you see a much taller building that could go in there, again, with outdoor access to solar and views. And then that building also has parking within there. So again, the code supports a building that could be built like that. Do you want to go through the next ones? We're kind of just going through here. So we did hear, like I said, we did hear from Cook Inlet Housing Authority late Friday, and Danielle worked over the weekend to kind of put together some responses to what they were saying, and let's just go ahead and start. I apologize, we didn't number the pages. But we're in section C, comment responses.
Good evening, everyone. Yeah, I'll just go through CHA's points. We're really glad to work with CHA, and they always give us, they really spend a lot of time on these comments, so we really appreciate them. We appreciate all the comments. And so they gave us a lot to think about, and some of the stuff I think that CHA was looking at was actually fixed in later versions. So I'll just go through comment by comment. The first was in the previous draft, there was a limitation on the B2B district for multifamily where you had to have at least 25 dwelling units per acre. That was in the old code. We also didn't know the provenance of that, so we removed it. The second one, is there a reason to not allow housing in the B2A core? Does this include mixed use, for example? So in the use table, you'll see that the housing that is allowed in the downtown core in B2A is mixed use. And the intent there is that really trying to encourage that high intensity area to have always a mixture of uses and make for just more of what would look like in a downtown. So as long as it's mixed use, housing is allowed there. The third one, are there implications for historic preservation if single family homes are no longer allowed? This is a distinctive use type downtown. Many former homes have been preserved and repurposed as offices. Do these become non-conforming structures even if used for non-residential purposes? We would like to believe that continued upkeep in these old homes is part of downtown's unique character. Absolutely, the use type of a single family home is not prohibited. It's not excluded. It's just the use. And that's really about if the city is investing all this infrastructure in this area, it kind of behooves the whole community to encourage that sort of higher density housing that can make the most of those investments. But offices are allowed, doctors' offices, all sorts of things are allowed that could be in those those building types. So if you have a single family downtown and you live in it, great, you can live in it as long as you need. It's only when the use changes that this code would impact anything. And if you're changing that to an office or something else that's a permitted use, it's also totally allowed. So it's not against the building type, it's just against the use. The number
Daniel,
4. Yep.
sorry, I'm just going to jump in real quick here and just say, I think, and I'll, curious for thoughts from other members of the commission, but I was looking through these earlier. I think a lot of these, at least to me, seemed pretty, they made sense when looking through them. I don't know that we need to necessarily go through all of them. But if there were any that you thought were kind of specifically worth discussing, or if commission members have specific questions about any items, we can go through those individually.
Yeah, through the chair, pending any other questions, please jump in. But one thing I'll mention that we're really glad that CHA brought up is there's, on the next page, the big comment, it's 2111.070, Development and Design Standards. It's about building entries and recesses. So you may have noticed that there are 2 places that talk about building recesses. And those two code sections were trying to do 2 different things. So the first one, it says a door has to be recessed 36 inches. That was to prevent a door from swinging out into the right-of-way. And so in our response, we said, well, that could maybe possibly be removed because it does make sense. We don't want to prohibit, sort of a sliding door or more flexible spaces, or even looking at Elizabeth Place. So that's something that could be changed and could be eliminated, just that specific 36-inch recess. The other recess was the work group felt really strongly about it, that was really more of a kind of safety and visibility issue, because we heard from a lot of people that they don't like to feel unsafe downtown. And so that was kind of a compromise between making for spaces that feel more safe for people walking by, but not necessarily, preventing somebody from using that space, right? It doesn't block somebody from being in that space. It just makes sure that if you're walking by, you can see into it. So we would agree with Siha that it's probably fine to remove that minimum recess of 36 inches and just leave the other requirement. That's kind of one of the main things. They mentioned that again later on. Some of the other things Siha mentioned were option items, and we said, well, those are options and they're not necessarily required. And I think those are kind of the main ones. And thank you, Mr. Chair. You had two very good points also about there's some typos with the table and also rearranging the, I believe it was canopies and plazas. And let's see. And those were kind of the main ones, I think, that really jumped out that we thought merited the most attention. And it does make sense, and they're great. All the comments were great, and so those are the recommendations we would make. But if there are any other questions, I think we'd be glad to discuss them.
Okay, thank you, and thanks for putting together responses to the comments that we sent out to have. We appreciate that. Yes.
Mr. Chair, I also wanted to bring your attention to the one comment that Siha made, 2111-070 Development Design Standards, Section D2G. They commented about the 2,000 square foot minimum plaza may not be appropriate size for a relatively small building. That we looked back to see if that was already in code. It was. What we did do here is we actually adjusted that to be a little bit smaller percentage of a building. But again, the alternative equivalent compliance can make can be used there if it's a smaller building and they can't meet that requirement in the code.
Okay, thank you for pointing that out. Commissioner Ron.
Thank you, the Chair. Thank you, staff, for that presentation. With respect to Cook Inlet Housing Authority comments, appreciate how you had laid those out for our awareness. So if the board is, or excuse me, if the commission is to move forward with this tonight and seek approval, is it my understanding that we should perhaps add a condition with respect to D1E that strikes that language as stricken in the table? And that would be removal of the words entries shall be recessed a minimum of 36 inches to meet this requirement. I just want to make sure that that's an action we would need to take as the commission if in fact we agree with the department there.
Yeah, that we would, if you want to make that motion, yes. You can actually make the motion to agree with staff's recommendations here if you want to do that related to the entire table. Yeah.
Commissioner Ron.
Thank you again through the chair. Staff, I'm interested in public comment, page 7 of 11 towards the back of the packet. The statement talks about simplification of the bonus table. In terms of its elimination, perhaps if I'm interpreting this correctly, the comment seems to suggest that this makes the largest scale of development easier, but yields a net increase of complexity for small to medium scale developments and improvements to existing buildings. Can you speak to that?
Sure, we can both jump in here. I don't think Mr. Garrett understood the alternative equivalent compliance option, and he's an architect. He came late to our presentations and wasn't able to get the full presentation of how things were changing. And he actually liked the bonus point table, but he had never used it. And so, yeah.
If I may add through the chair. Another piece of this is throughout the process, we really focused on doing what we could to balance the needs of people who really want to see a beautiful downtown and are really invested in that area, and also just the needs of the realities of building. And so I think in terms of the smaller scale, an example of where we really tried to make that easier is you'll see in the height thresholds that we made the height a lot easier, and we also said below a certain height, you don't really have to do any of the bulk form requirements. So just to really focus on those smaller scale developments, and also saying there's no lot size minimum. So if somebody wants to try something kind of innovative or crazy, they can do it on a smaller lot. There are no setback requirements, so that also makes that a little bit easier. So we did focus on that in an overall way of thinking about if somebody has a small 7,000 square foot lot, or maybe a 3,000, 4,000 square foot lot, what could we do so a lot of these things wouldn't apply if they're building below a certain height, and they can just do a pretty simple basic building. And I think you'll see that in the bulk form restrictions, which don't apply until you get above a certain height, and also the setbacks, and also the lot size minimums, and some of the other things. There's some other stuff too. If you build, I think, below 4 units, there are some exemptions if you're building a fourplex or so. So the bonus table was kind of, it had a lot of good ideas, and it was really sort of dreaming of the possibilities, but unfortunately it didn't seem to be producing the results, I think, that everybody wanted it to, and so that's kind of why we took this approach. And so the way we looked at, we made a lot of big gains for smaller development, but and we didn't hear anybody else involved in development, I don't think, who said that this would become an obstacle. But of course, we'd welcome other comment about it. So thank you.
Commissioner Krishna.
Yeah, I have a couple of questions. Maybe I'll start with just a kind of a broad one, right? Which is, I think I mostly understand the scope of this project. I think I just want to understand, in the long process with the working group, I understand that we didn't change the boundaries either of the overall downtown districts or of any of the individual kind of B2A, B2B, B2C districts. This is just like a broader question, but could you tell me a little bit about how we arrived at that sort of no change option? Or was it outside the scope of this project altogether?
Well, boundary changes, as you know, would have required a rezone. And that's why we took the name change off of the table, because that would have been a rezone too, which is its whole process. And then we interviewed quite a few property owners in the downtown area throughout this process, and none of them ever expressed to us that they wanted to be rezoned to what they already were. And so we felt like we were in a pretty good position. We did hear one comment last week about, why not just make it all one zone? But the thing of it is where the B2A is, that's where we want that little bit more density and height, and then kind of moving out a little bit, lower buildings, and then moving out a little bit lower buildings. And so I don't think we ever really heard from our working group that we felt that the zoning was an issue. And they've been working in downtown for years. Now, Tim may say something else when he gets up here, but I'm not.
Sure. No, I understand the practicalities there. I think I was trying to follow the process through, right, from start to finish. Maybe I'll may I ask another question? Thanks for including these maps of the new height limitations proposed around Paratrovich. I think these I think what I want to point out or ask is, overall, we've removed height limitations across the rest of the zones, right? So this is the one place where we're kind of putting new limitations, I guess, on some of these developments that didn't previously exist. So they're interesting to me for that. These height limitations for around Parachevich on the south side, are they reflective of the current building heights? I guess I'm asking for a little bit more information about how they were determined.
Sure. Through the chair, we can both jump in here. So a lot of throughout this process, we started in 2019. And we did a public survey where we received over 1,200 comments from the public. Over 300 people took the survey. What's good about downtown, what can be changed, and that kind of thing. A lot of what we heard about 4th Avenue is we want 4th Avenue to stay the way that it is. And they didn't necessarily talk about, like, we want every single building to stay exactly the way it is. They liked the idea that it was open, that it was a place where there was a park, where there was events, where streets could be closed, and they could sit there in the sun and enjoy the day. We heard a lot of comments about that. So again, Town Square Park, that's been in code for a long, long time, so that was just carried forward. But there was the recommendation, do we need to do the same thing for Petrovich Park so that we are keeping 4th Avenue, that historic district right there, basically the same as it is. And, we're open to any recommendations on that. And did you want to say anything?
Sure, and oh. Well, yeah, thank you for that information. I think I would just point out that the height limitations proposed are only along 5th, right? So they wouldn't actually do anything to preserve the existing kind of low density along 4th. Thank you. Maybe there'll be further discussion.
So I guess I'll jump in. I had a couple of questions about the bulk form restrictions, and mainly just to make sure I understand how this is working. So I'm looking at, I guess, page 28 of attachment 1, and the first question I have is for the tower standards in subsection 3 there, where they reference for all floors above the tower mass reduction height, the gross floor area of each floor shall be smaller than the floor with the largest GFA below that height. And that height, I guess just to confirm, I'm assuming that's referring to the tower mass reduction height.
Yeah, the threshold in AI in by each zone. So for example, in B2A at 112 feet, whatever the largest floor is below 112 feet, the floors above 112 feet have to be smaller, have a smaller gross floor area than the largest one below 112. But that's the one where you could basically just build up a pretty just regular boxy, bulky form up to 112 feet before you have to do the bulk form standards.
Okay, and so just to confirm, it's not suggesting that like 5 floors above 112 feet has to be smaller than 4 floors above 112 feet.
It's kind of like, you imagine you have a box, but then you can only put a slightly smaller box on top of those at every floor above. So you can never go back to that same gross floor area again. And that's so no matter what, you're going to have a little bit of tapering of some type. So you can't just have the same gross floor area going all the way up and maybe coming out on one side or another. Everything, for example, say you have 1,000 square feet is your biggest gross floor area below, let's do B2C, it's a little easier, below 52 feet. So you have 5 stories of 1,000 square feet, and then maybe you're along a street and you have to do a 7% reduction. So then you have to reduce, basically 93% of 1,000. Every floor above 52 feet is going to be, and gosh, I'm embarrassed, but whatever 93% of 1,000 is, and that's as large as you can go. You can't go back to 1,000 square foot floor area. So there's always going to be some sort of slightly smaller tapering, but you could maybe have some different shapes. And the design team was really trying to encourage flexibility, but also accommodate a pretty strong desire by a lot of people to make sure that buildings just don't go up and tower and take up the entire lot. Above a certain height, the building form has to change in some way, but hopefully not in a way that limits creativity, but also does have an impact on the sort of light and wind.
Okay, I think that answers my question there. So once you're, if B2C, for example, 52 feet is your threshold, if you've got 1,000 square feet below 52 feet, anything above 52 feet has to be 93% of that. But if you've got one floor above 52 feet that is smaller, say 85%, that doesn't lock you into 85% for anything above that point. You're still looking at the...
Exactly.
Okay.
So you could have five stories of 1,000 square feet, and then the biggest you can go above that is going to be 930 square feet. But you could have a 700 square foot floor, and then a 600, and then a 930 again. It's that sort of, you look at below the threshold, you take the largest floor area, and that's going to set the limitation above that height threshold.
Okay, and then the table there, again, I guess we were using 7% as an example, so you're on a street with a right-of-way with a width of less than 70%. The column on the right shows the percent reduction of 7%, and that percent reduction is referring to gross floor area, I assume? And what is the implication of subpart C there that says, well, and I guess my first question is that 7% reduction, it sounds like that's evaluated on a floor-by-floor basis. Is that right?
It could be. I think it's sort of like in our 1,000 square foot example. You just say, okay, everything above 52 feet now cannot be, the floor plate cannot be larger than 930 square feet. It can be anything below that. And I think C is kind of getting at that. All floors above independently. So you could have it smaller, but you could also go anywhere with, the range is basically now 930 square feet to, I don't know, whatever the minimum is.
Okay, and so C isn't implying that you could look at two floors and say combined they're 7% reduction, but maybe one is 5 and one is 9?
I think you could always reduce. You could always go smaller, but you could never go larger.
But 5 would be larger than 7%. I guess I just want to make sure that I found C a little confusing because to me it implied that you could look at the GFA reduction on something other than a floor-by-floor basis. Like you could combine floors when you're looking at 7% reduction. But it sounds like I may be getting too sideways here, but the intent is that each floor has to be no larger than 7%, or whatever the relevant percentage is.
Right. Each floor plate above that biggest one, it always has to be smaller. So you're stacking plates, and above a certain height, you can never put the same size plate on there. It's always going to be like a teacup or.
Okay. All right. I'll leave it at that. Thank you. Commissioner Ron.
Thank you, fellow commissioner and chair. Through the chair, I appreciate the renderings showing, personally speaking, a attractive looking block 56 and 65 and 65. Again, having just walked through a whole bunch of snow, I'm interested in how this idea of balancing, bulk form and impacts to light and wind downtown with still maintaining space that maximizes development in the vertical sense and creates design that's fit for purpose for where we live. So can you talk to me about the usability of these uncovered patios in Anchorage? I guess I'm concerned about the trade-offs and how they fit with where we are. Does that make sense? Where does the snow go that's on those uncovered patios?
Through the chair. There is a private open space requirement, private common open space requirement within the code. It's a certain percentage of buildings. And so again, the designer for these buildings used that private open space requirement to, and articulated that with these decks here in these buildings. And so, we've got buildings right now that have rooftops that are open. Holquist does some great condos that are right there along 9th Avenue, and they've got rooftops, and, I mean, there's a bunch of other ones that are here in town. So I would imagine it would be maintained similar to a building like that.
Commissioner Krishna.
Yeah, was there consideration at the working groups of removing the private common open space requirement within downtown? You're smiling because maybe that's come up many times. Thank you.
Through the chair, yes. The private common open space was like 3 votes for and 4 votes against. So we may hear about that tonight during the public hearing process. And yeah, we did, there was a private open space requirement in the code when we started this. It was through the entire downtown. We removed it with the update from between 9th Avenue to 7th for that whole entire area. And then there was a couple of folks that wanted to leave it in for a certain part of downtown that, buildings that weren't that close to the park strip. But again, that's a question that, you guys might want to talk about.
And if I may jump in, that just for if anybody's listening, I doubt anybody is, but the whole question of common open or required open space is sort of that the zoning code steps in to provide a certain quality of life for people. And so the discussion we had at multiple meetings was about, well, do we really need to require this in a place like downtown that has the park strip, the Tony Nails Coastal Trail, and all these other great spaces? And we also, we looked at how do we preserve Pittsburgh Park and Town Square Park. And those, in a way, become the common living room, right? The public living room for everybody. So that's kind of one of the discussion pieces. And to Commissioner Ron's point, I'm just looking through, and I think we were kind of wary of putting something in the code that would require a maintenance agreement, just because from the planning department's position, it's very easy to say, well, show us a maintenance agreement when you're getting this permitted. But in most cases, nobody will ever look at that again, or it'll get buried, and nobody is going to be able to follow up on it. So I think that's kind of, we've avoided it. So kind of 2 questions here is, a plaza like this, like you see on Block 56, the way this code is designed, that would be a private amenity, although this, if it's counting towards one of these features, it has to be publicly accessible. And so unfortunately, you have identified that, well, there might have to be some sort of maintenance there. With this code, that falls on probably the private sector, unless maybe there was some sort of organization downtown that was doing that. But yeah, the larger question is, well, does downtown need this? What role do the existing open spaces serve? Is that enough for people? And I think that comment came up in here, and I wanted to also, I think I forgot to mention that at the very beginning. That was something we also had discussed, so we addressed that in this table.
Mr. Chair, I also we missed one point that Commissioner Ron asked about, and that's about wind. During this process, and it was just so timely, it was just unbelievable. We really appreciated it. The 6th Avenue project that ACDA is working on with several partners completed a wind study, and what they found was the only wind impact of wind on the downtown area surrounding that building was going to be occurring in the summertime. The wind would be a little bit stronger then. And so we felt pretty secure in the visualizations that we put together here that wind would not be an impact to the buildings downtown that we're proposing here or showing here.
Commissioner Polis.
I wonder if you guys could just paint me a quick scenario for the 5th and 6th Avenue DOT right-of-way comment. With this kind of development, what are they stuck doing in right-of-way? Are they going to be required to put landscaping in the DOT right-of-way and then fight it out with DOT and get rejected? How's that going to play out under this current scenario? Is there something besides landscaping they'd be forced to put in too? Just kind of, do you know what they're going to be forced to put in DOT's right-of-way? Because I've been on some of those projects and it's hard to do that with DOT in their right-of-way.
Yeah, that's a great question. So as we were working on this, of course, the streets engineering study was looming on the horizon beyond. So that's kind of one of those issues where we weren't quite sure how to handle that, expecting that maybe things would change or maybe they wouldn't. I think as is right now, if you touch the right-of-way, this code requires you to put in the amenities required here. But if you don't touch, you don't have to. So I guess to answer your question, yeah, this code would say if you touch DOT right, or if you touch that right-of-way, you have to do it. Hopefully, maybe we could hear from Laquita a little bit later. This might be her comment, and we thank her for that because it's pointing something out. And from our perspective, is really about how do we manage what might be coming in the future without tying anybody's hands with this too much. And again, the landscaping standards exist, but they already existed. Another piece about the landscaping standards is many of them exist in Chapter 7. And in dealing with Chapter 11, there was only so much we could do, but you'll see with the alternative equivalent compliance, we applied that to pretty much everything in Chapter 11. So ideally, that could be a method, sort of a release valve for dealing with that. I don't know if Christine, you have anything else to add about that? Or Laquita, maybe. But so I guess short answer, yes, they would have to, but there might be some changes coming to that, so it's hard to say, I guess, at this point.
Okay, seeing nothing further pending, we'll go ahead now and open for public comment if anyone wishes to speak. Good evening. Can you turn on the mic? Sorry. There we go. Thank you.
Tim Potter of Tim Potter World Planning, or whatever you want to say. I had a stroke 2 years ago today, so I'm up walking and talking and shoveling and plowing snow and doing all those things. So I did want to come tonight because downtown is a very important piece of this town that has been overlooked for a long time. And everybody seems intent on doing town centers here and town centers there and spending money on that, when our real town center has always been downtown, and it's never been concluded as far as development, what we're going to do, what it's going to be. We lost focus. I've got 3 things basically to talk about tonight, and thank you for giving me 9 minutes because I can't talk as fast as I used to. So the first item is going back in time when the municipality incorporated and brought in Spenard and Mountain View and Eagle River and Chugach and Girdwood. And when that occurred, zoning came forward that recognized that the properties in the core of downtown had asset values and property values that were way out of whack with the rest of the suburban and outlying areas, so that downtown was really paying a huge amount of taxes. And at that time, to counter that, the assembly went ahead and said the downtown area doesn't have to provide parking for their uses. And the the sense of it was that the city was going to be responsible for providing strategically located parking structures in downtown. And the resultant layout would be that, based on studies from other northern cities and Anchorage, that the typical person walking in downtown in the winter is not really willing to walk beyond 2 blocks. And when it's 10 below and that north wind is blowing, you can understand why. And when we have snow and ice and rain on top of ice, it is a tough place to walk. And it's even has impacted my desire to go downtown when I used to go down every day to do business or shopping or whatever. So parking is key, and I've watched over the last probably 20 years that there have been numerous larger office and mixed-use complexes that have been designed through concept and even up to the next level of design. And when the tenants demanded that they had parking within a certain distance that they had control over, incorporating the parking into the building created a situation where the lease rates reflected that $50,000 a space and made their buildings non-competitive in the marketplace and look like they'd be non-competitive from a pricing standpoint for a long time. So having to provide that parking to meet the functional demand of the tenants created a situation where a lot of people went to Midtown or South Anchorage and had parking that was $8,000 to $12,000 per space based on land cost and improvement costs, rather than $50,000 to $55,000 per space. So you have 100 spaces, and it's over a $5 million investment. You have 200 spaces, and it's over $10 million. And that really skews the ability to build and be competitive in downtown. Having strategic located parking garages cures much of that. The second item is that heated sidewalks and a walkable downtown has been a long-term focused desire. And not saying that I was in favor with the bonus point system, but it at least had heated sidewalks as one of the elements that you could get bonus points for. Then after the obesity task force under Begich was done, in incorporating building the infrastructure but not turning it on, not making it fully operational, you could get half the bonus points. And the focus was trying to expand and develop a core of downtown that would be easily and comfortably and safely walkable year-round. And that's one of the huge components that is resulting in downtown going downhill. And I don't see that this plan follows through with making a walkable downtown. It doesn't seem to be addressed. Thirdly, there's 3 new blocks as far as height restrictions. And as I indicated to Christine, that when Tony Knowles was mayor, there were some bars downtown that were unruly, impacting things, causing criminal activity, and those businesses were purchased and they were taken out of business. And Town Square was being developed as one of his big deals as well. And when the city purchased the bars and the liquor license, they also purchased air rights above the existing buildings, like the Cobuck Coffee Shop and that. So you couldn't build anything higher than a certain amount so that the southern sun could actually reach Town Square. I'm not sure I understand why Block 41, 42, and 43 are being proposed for a significant height reduction and limitation that so clearly impacts the asset value of improvements that could be placed there and property taxes that could be charged in the future. And even the Egan Center, which you know is publicly owned, it has a great location. It's been looked at a number of times for additional development, either fully half block, a little bit taller with 2 or 3 additional floors for a potential replacement for City Hall, or putting residential above Egan Center, or building a tower hotel on one end of that half block. So I'd really appreciate it if the Planning Commission, rather than focusing all the attention on a public comment that talked about Peratrovich Park, look at when Peratrovich Park is used, which is primarily in the summer. And it doesn't play that big a role on a typical day in the winter. And to mess up the ability of building more permanent structures.
Go ahead and finish your
on
thought,
those
Mr.
blocks.
Potter.
I'd just like to finish. If you know, looking at the benefit and the cost and what the cost is to residents and taxpayers of the city, as well as those property owners, I'm fairly sure that the property owners would come back if this is proposed and say, okay, city, that's a taking. You haven't proved your point. You've reduced my property value and what I can build. You better pencil in some additional money. And I'm not sure any of that has been taken into account in this analysis and suggested direction. So those are my 3 issues. At least the first 2, I think, are the key to downtown development based on 41 years of doing that here and having projects that didn't go forward in downtown because of parking. I'd like to answer any questions now.
Commissioner Krishna.
Do you have any thoughts on how heated sidewalks might be incorporated into this code rewrite?
You know, that's been talked about quite a bit in the past, and it was even considered that as a part of doing development or redevelopment, there would be a tax incentive program that would help offset the initial construction of those improvements. Unfortunately, folks that weren't ever involved or around at that time or part of those discussions are currently looking under this administration at, we don't want to absorb any costs for maintenance, operation, repair, and if they never heard about heated sidewalks again, it would be great for them. And I don't think the departments and folks in charge of those departments are fully looking at how do you make downtown Anchorage work? What does it need? Figure it out. It's not rocket science. It is complex, but you can incentivize people to get the system that you want. And it really should be a system that is operated by the city, that is a linked group of improvements that are based on a similar design that the city has, and let it be constructed over time if that's what it takes. But without a walkable downtown core, it's never going to be what we all imagine it could be. And if we don't figure out parking, and I'll just tell you a little story to describe it, that parking is so important that when the Anchorage Parking Authority responds to your comment that how much parking do you have for downtown, they say, well, we have more than enough. We've counted our spaces and we've got more than enough. So why would we want to float a bond and build any more? Well, the problem is most of it is in the wrong place. I'm not going to park down on L Street or M Street to walk to the middle of the downtown core. Yeah, there's plenty of parking out there, but it's in the wrong location for the most part. And if we don't get that figured out, we won't have a thriving downtown either until climate change happens and it's 84 degrees with a trade wind breeze every day. So I'm not trying to be a smart ass, but I'm frustrated that the issue of the parking and heated sidewalks has been around for 30 to 40 to 45 years. And heated sidewalks have been instituted by a number of folks, including the public on F Street. And they don't even turn F Street on anymore. To prove it to a lot of users, even in the South Anchorage or Midtown area, having heated sidewalks reduces the cost of deterioration of their carpets and tile inside the building and makes it last longer. And over the years, that's been my argument to quite a few commercial users and developers here in town, which they've done. JL, Target, Providence Hospital, they understood the effect of having safe, walkable sidewalks all year round. And it's helped them. And it would help us make downtown a little bit more thriving. And have a stroke and then go downtown tomorrow and see how it works. It's not good.
Thank you for your comments, Mr. Potter. I have a question, I guess, with respect to your concerns about parking, and staff, please correct me if I'm stating any of this incorrectly, but we, at some point, I think last week, got a supplemental memo that changed the proposal with respect to parking to make structures, again, a permitted use, whereas the original plan listed as a conditional use. When you were talking about parking, I heard you mention structures a couple of times, and I guess I'm curious if that change addresses the specific concern you had about parking with respect to this code change?
Strategic location of smaller parking structures is the right way to go. And even back in 86, 87, when the Fifth Avenue Mall was going forward, they actually produced a 9-block plan that suggested to the city how you could make, both through sky bridges, building connections, and heated sidewalks, make a robust workable core area, and nothing ever happened with that. But a combination of sky bridges, tunnels, and heated sidewalks enlivens the sidewalk and the storefronts on the first floor, doesn't abandon the street front, and sky bridges can be incorporated on a strategic basis to connect uses that makes them work. So I just think that the parking and the heated sidewalks not being a priority element and figuring out how to promote that in this plan is a shortcoming. Thanks.
Thank you for your testimony.
Good evening. My name is Laquita Chmielowski. First, I want to just thank staff for all their hard work. I know it was a tremendous effort to get to this point and a lot of time spent by a lot of folks. Just a couple of things that I wanted to touch on. Tim mentioned the height restrictions that are currently in there for blocks 41, 42, and 43. I do have concerns about those remaining. It feels like there needs to be a little bit more due diligence to make sure that it makes sense. For example, the Key Bank building, which was just recently renovated, exceeds the height limitations that are currently proposed in code. It's 9 stories. And then looking at the comprehensive plan, our downtown comprehensive plan, it speaks to being sensitive to height limitations along 6th Avenue, which is part of what's already in code, which was established in 1985, as well as the R downtown. It references that original ordinance in 85 that set those height limitations, so it seems like we might want to look back to see if there's anything in that, when that ordinance was established, that might lend some light on why those limitations were set and how they were established. Also in the comprehensive plan, downtown comprehensive plan, there is a shadow study as well as the figures that you have here tonight. And what it actually showed was that there were shadows from several blocks to the south of existing buildings that cast onto the downtown park. So then the question is, where do we end those height limitations if we're really trying to make sure that there's no shadow cast on the park? And then just to speak a little bit to Commissioner Pulse's questions about DOT and having to do things within the right-of-way. So I was involved in the Key Bank renovations, which had some improvements that were planned for the right-of-way. There was actually more improvements planned than what we ended up being allowed to do. It took over a year to negotiate the improvements with DOT. There was lots of concerns about vehicles leaving the roadway and what they might strike within the sidewalk, so we weren't allowed to put any trees. Planters couldn't be more than 6 inches tall. If there's canopies, we have to have encroachment permits that expire within 5 years. And when we ultimately decided on what the features would be in the right-of-way, it required a memorandum of understanding between the municipality and DOT, and also maintenance agreements between the developer and the municipality. I'm all for having more amenities within the right-of-way and having those things in place. But for right now, as long as DOT has some say over what goes within those right-of-ways, it is an arduous process to get through. And with that, I'm happy to answer any questions.
Commissioner Pulse.
In your humble opinion, do you think this is a good step in the right direction with some of that stuff needing to be fixed in the future? Or is it like a postponed thing in your head? Just your humble opinion, please.
Thank you. So I really do think it's a step in the right direction. I just think that until there's something in place, an agreement between the municipality and DOT that gives the municipality more power over what goes in, at least within the sidewalk area of the right-of-way, it's just a lot of work to put on a developer, and cost and time, all of that goes into it, trying to reach an agreement.
Commissioner Krishna.
Just to clarify one of one of the points you made, so you're saying the current Key Bank building, which was just redeveloped, exceeds the 115-foot limitation that's in here?
So the
Proposed?
limitation, yeah, the limitation, the way it's written, would be 85 feet because it's on the north, let's see, southeast corner of Block 41.
Sure, okay.
So yes, it does exceed 85 feet.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you very much for your comments. So I guess I'll look back to staff. I don't know if we need to have a formal rebuttal set up here, but if there were any comments you wanted to make in light of the testimony we heard would be
Sure. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I appreciate both Tim and Laquita being here tonight. I've been working with them for quite a few years now, and we all have a love for downtown that I don't think a lot of people in this town have, and a burning desire to have it be fixed. And for them to come out and support what we're doing here, it's just, it's just heartwarming for me. Tim was right on about the strategic location of parking garages. And if you look in the downtown plan, we have 2 action items that are in there. One to do a parking study, and then one to develop a parking management program. And again, those are both in the downtown plan that you guys have already recommended for adoption and the Assembly has adopted. Heated sidewalks were also a big discussion item when we were working on the downtown plan, and there is also an action item in there for heated sidewalks. And I think we could come up with ways to incentivize those in the long run. Again, that would be an item that we would work on in the future, potentially with ACDA and the mayor's office. Right now we have a housing incentive, so a heated sidewalk incentive, tax incentive, there's ways to potentially work that out. And again, that's on page 106 in the downtown plan. Again, that's already been adopted and approved by the Assembly. Staff does not have any opposition to removing the height restrictions on Petrovich Park. Like I said, that came in with a lot of public comment. However, in light of what we're trying to do in downtown, we're supportive if that would come out. So that's our comment on that. And then we're fully aware that in the future the Egan Center might be redeveloped. It's not being used now to its capacity that they thought it could be used at one point in time, and we would love to see that building be used in the future. I think that's it. Did you have anything?
Yeah, if I may, just to speak kind of broadly about maybe 5th and 6th and the heated sidewalks, just to kind of keep it in context, Title 21 only applies to the private property, the private land use. And what happens in the right-of-way is subject to a lot of different rules. And there's only so much we can put into Title 21 that has any appreciable effect on what actually happens in the right-of-way. So we do require those trees because people want more street trees. They want a more walkable space, but then there's also the issue of, well, if somebody controlling that right-of-way doesn't want them, what does that do? So there's only so much that Title 21 can do to control that, and if DOT has a different set of priorities that don't necessarily align with what people have said about wide sidewalks and trees, that's another issue that we probably couldn't address in Title 21, or especially not in Chapter 11. And the other thing about heated sidewalks too, I would just point out that's a piece of public infrastructure. So I mentioned this at the work session. Throughout the project, we talked a lot about public versus private responsibilities. And a sidewalk system is essentially a public infrastructure system. And one of the comments you'll see from CIHA is they talk a lot about, well, is this a public responsibility or private responsibility? Open space, for example, or some of the street lighting. And I think Generally, we did talk a lot about heated sidewalks. It is mentioned in the plan, but when thinking about making that a requirement, we really had to weigh that if you tell people, well, you need to dig up the sidewalk now and put in heating and you have to take care of maintenance, that would also produce a lot of pushback. Not that it wouldn't be a great thing or not that it's not what people would love, but just requiring private development to invest in that type of public infrastructure without a long-term guarantee that it'll be used or maintained, it's a very big ask. And in this code, at least in this economic environment, I think we were working more towards the lean and efficient and try something, although the plan does ultimately support that. So I think overall, everybody in the group and everybody in this process, everybody wants a vibrant public space and they want good private spaces as well. Title 21 zoning really only touches the private property. We do talk about ideal sidewalk widths, but at the end of the day, what happens in the right-of-way is probably governed by a different code. So I just want to keep that in context. You can put stuff in Title 21, but whether or not it actually has the effect in the right-of-way or not, unfortunately, it isn't as powerful as some might like it to be.
Mr. Chair, one other item too. Also in the downtown plan, there's an action item to complete a downtown streets engineering study, and we have been funded with $550,000 to do that study. We'll be coming out with that after the first of the year, probably quarter 1, with a request for proposal on that. And so the planning team, my long-range team, is working with AMATs to figure out the best scope for that, and we've had some talks internally about what that could be. I can't speak for Public Works or Lance Wilbur, our boss, on what the conversations are on 5th or 6th Avenue. I know that I have heard that we've determined that the Muni actually does own 5th and 6th, and we did essentially propose in the plan that 3rd Avenue and L Street come off on the National Highway System. And so, that would be helpful to move toward fixing the streets in downtown, but it's going to be a little bit of a process there. We can work through that. And the other thing that folks, I'm sure you're all aware that those DOT streets in the downtown area all receive funding from the Federal Highway Administration to rebuild them and maintain them. And so if the Muni does take that over, then we have to be able to support the Public Works Department to get more funding to be able to do that too. So there's it's a balancing act for us. And like Tim said, the heated sidewalks are turned off now. We asked that question when we started this process, and I got the email, they're turned off. They're turned off.
Thank you. Commissioner Spinelli?
Yeah, with regards to the DOT improvements and Title 21 only controlling what's on property, I guess I'm a little confused what I heard from public testimony versus what staff just represented. And I guess I want to get a little more explanation on, is Title 21 suggesting that a project should be required to put landscaping in the right-of-way, which is holding back the approval of a project?
I think the issue with landscaping really comes down to if you touch the right-of-way. So in saying that Title 21 governs private property, it's mostly about private property, but there is that stipulation that says if you touch the right-of-way, then you have to follow these other requirements. But again, as our speakers pointed out, but DOT might also have the power to kind of overturn that. So to me, it seems like we can put a lot into Title 21, and some of it might go through to get what people want to see. But at the end of the day, as Commissioner Polis pointed out, DOT might just make them tear it up. So that's another thing we're trying to manage also, is say, okay, don't require too much, and if you're going to require it, make sure that it's going to last or something, or there's a way to maintain it. So I guess I would just say primarily Title 21 looks at private property. Obviously, there are some things where it can say you have to do landscaping if you do X, Y, and Z, but it becomes a little more complicated with those kind of working with PM&E and working with memorandums of agreement. This was really just looking at what if somebody just wants to build something on their property, not touch the right-of-way? Can we make it easy to do that without too many requirements? And so that's why the language we use, I think, is that if a project disturbs the right-of-way, so if you don't disturb the right-of-way, you can get away from dealing with that. But a lot of that is already in code. I think the landscaping standards, I believe, in Chapter 7, and a lot of Chapter 11 refers to Chapter 7, so I believe that's throughout. But I imagine you would probably know more about that with more experience.
And I guess as a follow-up, is there I guess my main concern is to have a project that's ready to go forward, say everything's approved, but we haven't worked out the landscape requirements required by Title 21, and DOT's not accepting them. Is there a possible way to allow a project to move forward just knowing that maybe or maybe not, DOT's not going to let you put one blade of grass in the right-of-way? I mean, I guess that's, my point is like, what I'd like to see is a project be able to move forward, assuming you cannot come to a resolution with DOT. I mean, I'm trying to build a house on the side of the Alyeska Highway, and it's pretty difficult to get DOT to let you cross their bike trail. Like, so I can imagine planting trees in the middle of downtown would be even more difficult. Is there any recommendation on what we could change to allow projects to move forward so DOT doesn't hold up a project? I guess is what my main concern here.
I think that's a discussion that we can have further in the office and talk about that with Dave and Craig and you know, maybe get some insight from Laquita. Yeah.
It's just us here.
I might add, maybe not in Chapter 11 of Title 21, or if it did, it'd have to be in an overall Chapter 21 or Title 21. But it's very hard to jump into that jurisdiction from sort of weak launching pad.
I guess what I was looking for was the easy button to just jump out of DOT. But
I had a follow-up question on the common open space requirement. I think I was maybe expecting to hear some testimony about it, given the earlier discussion, and didn't. And I was wondering if you could just flesh out a little bit your comment about the vote and what the thinking was, and kind of what staff's, at the moment, what the recommendation is in light of the response here to the comment about supporting removing the private common open space requirement.
I would say the argument in favor of common open space or private open space required is to ensure that people living in because it's always on multifamily housing, have a certain amount of space to go out and recreate. The argument against is that, well, that's an amenity, maybe it doesn't need to be required, or in a place like downtown where you have a bunch of parks, it doesn't necessarily need to be required. And also that sometimes when those spaces get built, they're of such low quality that it's a little like doggy poo area next to the parking lot, and that counts as open space. I think the group was split, but we did get this comment from SIHA, and I think we've maybe heard from, well, I can't say that I've heard specifically from anybody, but I know that we got this comment from SIHA, and we see, I think, that, and I think we would generally understand that, yeah, I mean, downtown has a lot of great open space, and if it comes down to cost, and somebody says, well, why do I have to create this private common open space when we have the park strip right here? It's really hard to say, yeah, we should still require it. So I think in a place like downtown where it's intended to be for high density, it's intended to be about a lot of housing. If that's one of the things that makes housing a little more complicated to build, I think there's a pretty good argument for getting rid of it, especially since the park strip is such an incredible facility. And I mean, there's just so much great stuff downtown, and there is plenty of open space. So I don't know if Christine, you wanted to add anything else?
We would not be opposed if that was removed.
Okay, thank you. And I don't see any comments pending at the moment. I realized I don't think I've officially closed the public hearing, so we'll go ahead and do that. The public hearing is closed. And I guess what's the will of the body on this one? Or these three, to be precise. Commissioner Spinelli.
Okay. I'll move to approve the review recommendations by the Planning and Zoning Commissions to the Assembly of the proposed text amendments of AMC Title 21, 2107, Development and Design Standards, and Chapter 21.11, Downtown, including staff recommendations.
Thank you, Commissioner Spinelli. And I guess just to clarify the scope of your motion with respect to staff's recommendations, I know we received via email, I think, on, gosh, I'm losing track of my dates here, sometime last week, a supplementary packet with some proposed amendments, and then also attachment 5 with some proposed amendments. Are you including both of those in addition to the original materials we received?
Yes, everything that staff has recommended.
Okay. Your motion is seconded by Commissioner Pullis. Commissioner Spinelli, would you like to speak to your motion?
Yeah, I basically made the motion to get the ball rolling. I figured we could discuss height restrictions in blocks 41, 42, 43, and the possibility of changing the requirement for private open space if the body had the appetite for that. But other than that, I just wanted to get things moving.
Commissioner Krishna.
I'd like to propose an amendment to remove the height restrictions that were proposed for blocks 41, 42, and 43 to the south side of Paratrovich Park.
I'll second that amendment.
Could you restate your motion?
Yeah, an amendment to remove the height restrictions in blocks 41, 42, and 43 to the south side of Paratrovich Park. Yes, I believe that's correct.
Okay, thank you, Commissioner Krishna. Seconded by Commissioner Ron. Commissioner Krishna, would you like to speak to your motion?
Yeah, I appreciate the discussion, having heard testimony that is against these height restrictions. I think I would just say that at this point, there was no information in our packet that made a compelling case to me for why these new restrictions should be instituted. I think for that to happen, I would want to see a discussion with those property owners and some more analysis about the potential development scenarios that might occur on those properties. And knowing that maybe one of those buildings is newly out of compliance with those height restrictions, I would say I'm not seeing the case right now for those, and would be more comfortable removing them from this code rewrite.
Okay, I don't see any comments pending. We can go ahead and call a vote on this motion to amend.
Commissioner Eber.
Yes.
Thank you.
I'm here.
Okay, 7 votes in favor. That motion passes. The motion to amend. We're back to the main motion as amended. Commissioner Krishna.
Yeah, I'll get the ball rolling and also propose an amendment to remove the common open space requirement throughout all of the downtown districts.
Second.
And I guess just a quick question for staff. Does that provide enough clarity for purposes of, okay. So the motion is to remove the common open space requirement in all the downtown districts, moved by Commissioner Krishna, seconded by Commissioner Spinelli. Commissioner Krishna, would you like to speak to your motion?
Sure, I feel less strongly about this than the height restrictions, but see a benefit towards creating more flexibility for development. And I also believe that the downtown, as supported by code and planning and community efforts that we all want to see, involves more public amenity and green space. I would also maybe note that removing the minimum lot size and some of the other changes proposed in this rewrite would support maybe more flexibility, and removing this open space requirement may provide it. I would welcome other discussion.
Yeah, Commissioner Spinelli.
I don't do a lot of development in downtown, but I have done buildings with the private open space requirement, and it's quite, it can be a burden, even in less urban areas. And so with the kind of design trends for micro apartments and this and that, like I would hate to see somebody like figure out that they could make a tiny apartment pencil, but then have to create a private open space that's almost the same size as their living space, and just probably blow the project out of the water. So given the kind of urban aspect of downtown, I don't think that this is necessary. And I think if people choose to provide it, they will. And if not, I don't think it's a necessity that code should require.
Commissioner Ron.
I appreciate the comments from the two previous commissioners. Helps me better understand where I think I want to land on this. But just for clarification, we're talking about private common open space here, right? Not public common open space for a private development, if that's understood by other commissioners. So we're talking about a common space for the development itself that's open to users of that development, as opposed to a publicly open space. Seeing some head nods.
Okay. That is my understanding. And I'm looking at staff. I see head nods as well.
Thank you.
Okay, seeing nothing further, we'll call the vote.
Commissioner Eber.
Yes.
Thank you.
7 votes in favor, that motion passes, and we are back to the main motion as amended. Commissioner Ron.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Fellow commissioners, with those two amendments, for the record, I do intend to support. while I don't think it fixes everything or gets us to the future state that all of us may want to be in today, I see it as a positive step in many forward directions. With respect to the comments provided by members of the public, I do appreciate them, especially those around making downtown a more walkable and pedestrian-oriented and friendly space. We heard from the department that there may be other avenues to do that, and I look forward to seeing those results in that direction as well. Thanks.
Commissioner Polis.
I'll just kind of second that and say that, I think this is a step in the right direction, and I think the public comments we heard tonight about 5th and 6th right-of-way, heated sidewalks, and parking is crucial in the future. I totally agree with that. I don't know how we'd solve that tonight, but we've seen that it's in the works, and because of all that, I intend to support this motion.
Okay, looks like we're ready to vote.
Commissioner Eber.
Yes.
Thank you.
Seven votes in favor, that motion passes. And that brings us, I was just about to say we're done. We are not. We have two more items that require voting on, 2022-0133 and 0134. Commissioner Ron.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I move the Commission approve review and recommendation by the Planning and Zoning Commission of an ordinance amending Anchorage 2040 Land Use Plan and amending AMC Section 21.01.080, Table 21.01-1, Comprehensive Plan Elements.
Thank you, Commissioner Ron. Your motion is seconded by Commissioner Spinelli. Commissioner Ron, would you like to speak to your motion?
Just briefly, appreciate how staff has laid this out, concur with the department's recommended findings, including finding number 2 around the change creating an administrative burden and undue cost. I intend to support the motion.
Okay, seeing no further comments in the queue, we'll go ahead and call the vote.
Commissioner Eber.
Yes.
Thank you.
Seven votes in favor, that motion passes. Leaves our final item for the evening, which I think if you wait a second, you might have a draft motion to consider. And this is case 2022-0134. Commissioner Krishna.
Yes, I make a motion to approve the recommendation, or to approve an ordinance amending our downtown, the Anchorage District Plan 2021, and amending AMC Section 21.1.80, Table 2101-1, Comprehensive Plan Elements.
Seconded by Commissioner Spinelli. Commissioner Krishna, would you like to speak to your motion?
No, thank you.
I'll just note, I think the recommended amendment here is consistent with the other cases we've heard this evening, and I concur with the recommended findings proposed by staff. Go ahead and call the vote.
Commissioner Eber.
Yes.
Thank you.
Okay, that motion passes as well with 7 votes in favor. That is the final item on our agenda, so we'll just look for a motion to adjourn. Moved by Commissioner Polis, seconded by Commissioner Winchester. Seeing no objection, we are adjourned.